Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I'll be working on a repair. As you can see, we have an incredible Hulk and Wolverine maquette statue by Sideshow Collectibles. This was a 1/5 scale diorama, and this thing is literally smashed in pieces. As you'll notice, the right corner is totally missing, right down to the edition size and the nameplate. Flipping the base over, we have a better look at all of the damage, and I definitely have my work cut out for me on this one. There is a lot that needs to be repaired. So here is that same corner that we were just looking at flipped over, and on the other side of the base, we're missing another piece of the corner. And then lastly, on the smaller piece of the tree trunk, we have the tip of the wood that is completely broken off. So this wood trunk is actually the piece that keys in right where it's broken. Luckily, my client was able to salvage a few of the broken pieces. So on the left corner, we have a piece of the top, which I'll be able to glue back in place. But as you can see, there is still a giant section that is missing that will need to be reinforced and then resculpted and repainted. Over on the right side, again, we have a piece that I'll be able to glue back on, but I still have a lot of work to blend in any seam lines all around the piece that was created from the break. Even with the clean breaks, which this is almost one of those cases, just gluing it back in place, there will always still be a visible hairline crack. So my job is to make sure you do not see that and to repair it as if it were brand new. My client also sent me a few other smaller pieces that he was able to salvage. I don't think I'll be using any of these. They're just really too small and most likely won't be useful. So the majority of the work will be me resculpting whatever is missing. So here's another quick overview of the damaged areas, and as you can see on the left corner, the walls of the polystone are very thin. So I'll need to reinforce those and thicken them up to make sure this holds up from future breaks. Okay, so in this next step, I reinforced the hollow cavity with some high density thick foam. I left a small gap between the polystone wall and the foam, in which I'll stuff some epoxy weld to thicken up the polystone walls in that area. And it will also create a backdrop for me to go in with some epoxy sculpt and start resculpting all of the missing rockwork. So fast forward about 6 hours, I glued back some of the pieces with epoxy weld, and I went in with epoxy sculpt and resculpted the rock and stone texture. At this point, it's still early stages. I'll need to go back and sand this all down. Looking over on the right corner, I glued back on that piece and I went in with some epoxy sculpt and filled in any of the cracks that were showing. And again, I'll go in and sand it down and blend it all together. This way, when I go in later on with the paint, it'll give it a nice smooth transition. Here's a look at the smaller tree trunk piece. I went in and glued that piece back on and then used some epoxy sculpt again to fill in any noticeable cracks. And I also resculpted the tip that was missing. Not only did I just glue the piece back on, but I also inserted a metal brace between the two parts to better strengthen the break. This way there's no future damage. Okay, once everything was sanded down and the areas were smoothed out, it was time to go in with some primer. I'm using a black surface primer, which can be applied with an airbrush gun. Whenever I do this, I like to use my cheaper airbrush gun so I don't damage any of the internal seals. And then later on, when I go back to matching the paint back to the factory colors, I'll go in and use my better airbrush gun, which has better control. So at this point, I'll just be going around and priming over any areas that I sculpted with the epoxy sculpt and getting it prepped for the paint. Okay, and here's how that's looking with all the areas that needed to be primed before the paint can be applied. At this stage, I'm going to start mixing up some paint samples and try to match that factory paint job. So from time to time, I get asked how I match the paint back to the factory, and there really is no simple answer or trick. It just comes from years of experience being a painter. I've been painting my whole life, and it's just something I have an eye for, as well as spending a lot of time doing sample tests. So at this point, I'm mixing up a batch of the base color that was used under the top layer of paint. Not the actual base color, but the base coat color that's used before they go in and add all the shadows and highlights and effects. I looked at the inside of the keyholes and also noticed as I was sanding down the top few layers of paint that they had used an orange clay color as the overall base tone. So I'll be doing the same, going in with the base coat of this orange clay color, and then I'll go back in and mess around with all the highlights and shadows and any paint texture effects that I need to recreate. Okay, so now that I found the right color, it's time to go around and spray over the areas with the primer and blend it into all the surrounding base colors. Okay, I have my base coat color down. Now it's time to mix up a batch of the top color, which is like more of like a mustard khaki color that was used to create the muddy sand appearance. So same thing, I'll be mixing this up until I get the correct color and then going around and spraying it over that orange base tone color. Okay, so now that I got the colors matched up, the work is not done here. I need to go in and now match all the paint texture techniques that they had used. And the first thing I'm going to be doing is an ink wash to fill in all the little crevices and cracks. What this does is it allows me to shade and color all the cracks and crevices, but not the top layer. And to achieve that effect, one thing I like to do is spray a clear coat before applying my ink wash. This way the ink wash only falls into the cracks, and then I'm able to go back and wipe it off from any of the top areas of paint where I don't want it. So now when doing this, even when you wipe it off, it still does darken up the paint, which is why I put down my colors a little bit brighter ahead of time. So all the tans and oranges that I previously just sprayed, I went a little bit brighter with the color because now the ink wash will darken that up a little bit and blend it into the rest of the base. So I'm just going around blotting on my ink. The longer you leave the wash on the surface, the darker it gets, and vice versa. The quicker you wipe it off, the lighter the color will remain. Letting it dry and doing multiple layers will also build it up slowly and darken it as well. So now that I have my shading and the cracks and crevices to where I want it, the next paint texture technique that I noticed that was used on the base, and it's probably not showing up on camera, but I'll try to show you later on what I'm talking about. But they had used a speckled paint effect with tiny dots of paint to create a texture. And the way to do that and apply it is by using a toothbrush or a bristle brush. This is also the same technique that I use when I want to create blood splatter. So basically you're dipping your bristle brush into the paint and flicking it onto the area to create a speckled textured effect. At this point, it's going to look a little crazy, but I'll be going back and forth between the two different tones of brown until I get it to the way I want it to look. Keep in mind, anything I do on my videos and on camera, you're only seeing a couple of minutes that were edited compared to hours of work that I put in behind the scenes. So you're not 100% seeing everything, otherwise this video would be 10 hours long, but I'm covering the majority of what was done. And with that said, fast forward, let's take a look at the final repair. It was definitely a challenge, but I couldn't be happier with the way this came out. As always, guys, thanks so much for watching. Feel free to leave a comment and or subscribe, and I'll see you in the next project.